Hey Steph, it's Friday. I've been reminded several times this week about how there's actually very little that any of us can do, especially me, that's truly original. Even if I learn something, I learned it from someone. I'm not doing original research. On that note, there's a couple things that I saw or read or watched this week that I'd like to recommend to you. So I'm going to put a bunch of links in the description below. I think you should take a look at them. It'll give you a little bit of context for what I'm talking about today. First off, I want to talk to you about a video that I've been trying to do for about a month now, maybe a little bit more than a month. I've put it off so far because it's a lot of work, and I'm job hunting right now, so I don't really have a ton of time for that. I want to talk about evolution. First of all, because I think it's a really, really cool topic, but also because I think it's a really misunderstood concept. I hope to explain it in a way that I thought might make the fact that our ancestors really were lizards at one point, even though that's a little hard to believe. And I'm hoping that I still can make this video. But anyways, I'll tell you why I haven't so far, sort of why I'm on this whole thing of it's hard to do something original. So the concept that I wanted to use for this video was basically to shrink the entire history of life on Earth, which is about 4 billion years, shrink it down because we can't conceive of a time like 4 billion years. So I wanted to shrink it down to either a 12 or 24-hour period. And basically that way, everyone sort of has a feeling of what a day is like, whereas we have no concept of what a billion is. As humans, it's really hard for us to understand large numbers. I actually even did the math for all the different epochs and different states of evolution at that time, and I wrote pretty much all the script. I knew it was going to be a lot of work to finish the video, and that's why I haven't done it yet. But then I was on YouTube and I saw, even though it definitely wasn't for the first time, another video that sort of tackled this from almost the exact same perspective. It's by people I've talked about before, the team behind the YouTube channel ASAP Science. And I say that I've probably seen it before because I've watched all their videos and I really like these two guys. They talk about science and they do it in a really interesting way with drawings and that. So they approached this concept, the concept of shrinking human, or not human history of life on Earth down into a 24-hour period. They did it in an animated way, so they did it with a bunch of drawings that sort of moved along. There's a link in the description. What they did and what I was trying to do was to put in context that evolution is not only possible, it's actually a scientific fact. And given millions or billions of years, it's very easy to see how we evolved from creatures that looked like our modern apes, and they evolved from creatures that look like somewhat like our modern rodents, who evolved from creatures that look somewhat like our modern lizards, who evolved somewhat like our modern amphibians, who evolved somewhat like our modern fish, and ultimately we all came from single-celled bacteria. But over billions of years, it's really easy to see that we humans, modern humans, are literally just a blink. We're literally, out of that 24-hour clock, we're in the last couple of seconds, maybe the last second. So I don't want to get too much into detail on that because I do eventually plan to make that video. I don't know exactly how yet or when. I'll probably want to get a job before I put that much work into something because I'll need money before I need that video to be made. Anyways, so in this video, I wanted to talk about how we tend to think really fondly about the past. We talk about the good old days and how good it used to be and how much better things were back then. But also, we tend to think that we're sort of steadily marching towards some ultimate goal. There's a lot of talk about, for instance, the singularity where machines can have the same brain power, intelligence as a human. But I don't really think that's the case. That's not how our world works. It's how we like to think it works. So the universe is constantly going, ebbing and flowing between various states. So basically, things that are happening right now and everything that's happened before will almost inevitably happen again. If you have an original idea, you're taking at least some influence or some source from something else, be it a book or a movie or a song, play, a textbook, a professor, a teacher, or parent, something. But nothing that you're doing is really original, and that's okay. This video isn't original. All the ideas in this video are things, well, I've thought about some of them, but they're not original thoughts. I'm not the first person to think these things. We're all constantly evolving based on where we are and who we interact with for our entire lives. Our memories are constantly being changed and rewritten based on new information and hearing things again. Yeah, there's information constantly entering and leaving our brains every single day, all the time. As an example, to sort of bring this back to your video this week about memories and experiences from our childhood, specifically the story about the bird that came into our little house on 17th Ave. So that bird literally scared the crap out of me. I was terrified. I don't really like things that I don't I can't know what they're thinking, so animals often are scary until I sort of get to know them a little. In my memory, and maybe mom or dad can correct me if I'm wrong, but you weren't there. You weren't there for this when this happened, when the bird came in. It was just me and dad. And it wasn't a very long period between us discovering the bird or it flying in and scaring us to getting it out. It was maybe 5 or 10 minutes, if I recall. My only memory of this vividly, because it was terrorizing, was a bird swooping towards me in the kitchen, not super close to me, maybe 10 feet away. And I had a glass of milk that spilled probably most of the glass all over the kitchen floor. But yeah, we dealt with it pretty quickly. So our brains, human brains, are really, really good at telling stories, like extremely good. And so you can actually picture our entire family in that house being scared by a bird swooping around and it taking hours to get it out. That's actually something that can easily get imprinted on your brain and remembered as fact. It's a really cool phenomenon, and one of the links that I put in the description is a podcast by cracked.com about memories, and it's a really good listen if you have an hour or so. Another really great thing I read this week, it might have been this week or last week, it's a story from another great YouTube personality that I really like, CGP Grey. He also has a podcast that he does with another guy who have talked about Brady Heron, in which they talk about this story. But I'm specifically talking about the story and maybe a little bit about the conversation they have on the podcast. I'll put links to everything that I'm talking about below. Don't start watching his video, CGP Grey, right now, because you're never going to want to stop, and I want you to hear the rest of what I have to say. But you should watch some of his videos. They're really, really interesting. He talks a lot about geography and politics, political systems, but there's also just sort of random, and he explains things really, really well. So what he wrote about was that, well, the headline of the story was "I've died many times," and basically it was about the idea that we're constantly becoming new people. We're not the same person we were a few years ago or 10 years ago or 20 years ago. We're constantly able to sort of not regenerate ourselves, but we're able to stop being the person that we were before and take on new traits and learn new things. So I've listened to this podcast that he does for about the last 6 months. It's called Hello Internet. And basically CGP Grey and I like to think of it that I like to think that we share a brain, or at least part of our brain is shared. The things that he talks about and the things that I think overlap about 95%. We agree on almost everything, or at least I agree with him. So in this topic of changing selves and sort of being able to recreate yourself or be reborn in a different way, really, really strongly appealed to how I feel right now. And I feel like who I am right now is completely different from the person that I was in high school or in elementary school, or even as early as, say, 3 or 4 years ago. I've been changing completely many, many, many times. I've talked to people before in describing my friendships and my acquaintanceships as always being they're constantly sliding away from you. Everyone you know is constantly becoming stranger and stranger to you. And the only way that you can stop that sliding is by communicating with them, by talking or by exchanging texts or emails or video chats or whatever, these videos. So the people I see on a regular basis, Julia, mom and dad who I talk to all the time, you through these videos, and then my close friends who I see on a regular basis, I know you guys pretty well. There are some things we don't talk about, but for the most part I think I know you. But I have a lot of friends or acquaintances that I don't really talk to on a regular basis. Every time I do talk to them, it's nice, but I don't really feel like I know them. I hesitate to call them friends. They're outside of my sort of social circle. They're people that, I know people that know them, but I don't really know them directly. If you go back even further, there are a lot of people I knew in high school or in first year or second year university who I literally haven't talked to in years. And for them, if I went to talk to them again right now, we would basically be complete strangers. Yeah, we never keep in touch. And so Facebook is as a network, I mean, Facebook, MySpace, Twitter, all these social media sites are undoing some of this work. Seeing posts from someone on social media isn't really enough to know them. Like, there are people I talk to on social media that I've never met before, but I don't feel like I know them. Similarly, seeing someone's name pop up on Facebook, I wouldn't consider that person a friend just because I sort of know kind of what they're up to, or what they at least tell people that they're up to. So yeah, I basically consider, if I don't talk to someone for 3 years, they're not, even if we were really good friends, for whatever reason we stopped talking, I don't really consider us friends at that point. I'd be fine getting to know that person again, but it would be similar, if not exactly the same thing, as getting to know a completely different new person. because we have both completely changed. I have another example to bring this one into perspective, and this is something that happened last year with our cousin Mike. I guess it was last year or beginning of this year. He's my co-host on this series that I do, Future Chats. When we were in high school, we were really, really close and really good friends. We hung out all the time. We would have heated arguments every time the concept of the thought experiment airplane on a conveyor belt came up. We would argue about it for hours, and it would never end. So he swore that if you had an airplane that was on a conveyor belt moving the other direction, that it could still take off. I was absolutely adamant that if the plane wasn't moving, like basically the treadmill or the conveyor belt's going at the same speed as the airplane trying to take off. So the airplane's effectively not moving. Air can't go over the wings, it can't fly. Every time we would talk about this, we would fight and get nowhere. Both just believing sort of what we had thought, and that was it. We couldn't agree. Fast forward a few years, because Mike and I we had drifted apart, and we talked every couple months, but we weren't talking on a regular basis. But now, doing these future chats and talking to him, we talk pretty much every day, if not every day. The concept, I was talking, sort of reminiscing with him, and the concept of airplane on a conveyor belt came up. I brought this up remembering all these horrible long arguments that we'd had. So we brought up our points of view again. Instead of having a big debate, we basically just talked about this stuff rationally to each other for 10 minutes, and then kind of agreed that we were both right in our own way. Basically that it's a thought experiment, so it's something that you can't actually do in real life. What we agreed was that under normal circumstances, this airplane is going to be able to take off while it's on a conveyor belt, because you can't set up a system where the plane isn't moving at all because the conveyor belt speed is the exact same as the airplane moving the other direction. And so Mythbusters did this in one of their myth that they tested, and they found the same thing. They were able to get an airplane to take off on a conveyor belt. But Mike agreed, from my perspective, if you literally had a perfect system where the conveyor belt was moving at the exact same speed as the airplane wouldn't be able to move and therefore wouldn't be able to take off. So we were able to resolve that conflict really, really quickly, because at that point, we were both different people. We'd matured, we'd grown up. We took less stock in exactly our ideas, and we were able to work together to come to an agreement. I was really surprised by this, because it was the first sort of time that anything like this had ever happened to me, being fairly young. I was expecting him to be exactly the same as he always had been, and I was thinking that I thought that I had matured, but I was picturing him the exact same as he was, whereas I forgot that at the same time as I was maturing, he was also maturing. Yeah, and so when that happened, we came to an agreement in record time, and we've had many, many chats since then, and been able to do the same thing, be able to be mature and come to a reasoned agreement instead of just endlessly arguing about stuff. On that note, you might have heard there's a story in biology that our cells replace themselves. Like basically all of our cells replace themselves at least every 7 to 10 years. So you can say that after, say, 10 years, every cell in your body has been replaced by a different cell. With that theory, you're a completely different person every 10 years. There's literally nothing about you that's the same. And so part of me thinks that's completely 100% true, and the other part of me thinks that's completely false. So on one hand, you are literally completely different. You don't have to hold on to any part of yourself for that 10 years. You can have new thoughts, you can have new feelings, you meet new people, you do new things. Nothing about who you were defines who you are now or who you want to be. If you change, you are no longer the person you were. On the other hand, because we're slowly and steadily dropping parts of ourselves, different cells, and adding new ones over a long period of time, you can make the argument that who you are doesn't really change overall, because you're changing very steadily and slowly. So the only way you would notice that someone was completely different is if you went away for the whole 10 years and then came back. You'd notice that they're a completely different person. For yourself, you're never going to notice it. It's sort of like that if you can boil a frog if you just turn the heat up really, really slowly. And so on that note, there's a story that's often used in philosophy called the ship of Theseus. Theseus was the captain of this ship. He sailed it all over the place. He sailed it for so long, eventually every part of it broke or rotted away or rusted and needed to be repaired and replaced. And so after a certain amount of time, after a certain amount of sailing trips and voyages and everything, whatever ships do, there were absolutely zero parts of the ship that remained from the original ship. And the argument is that ship the same one as the one that was originally built? Is it still his ship, or is it a totally different ship? I also, this thinking about this and talking about it reminded me that it's sort of similar to talking about something like the American Constitution. This document was written by people who are not perfect, who are humans the same as you and I are humans. In 1776, they disagreed on a lot of things, but ended up compromising and writing out a document that would decide a lot more than they realized at the time. We're still talking about it hundreds of years later. There's literally nobody alive who ever corresponded or talked to or met with any of the founders of the US. You might have to even go 2 or 3 connections back to find somebody alive today and connect them to one of the founders of the US. So can you really say that the modern United States, with all of their disputes about religious freedom, with all of the amendments to the Constitution and the Constitution itself, for instance, the gun laws have been interpreted so many different times, but we don't really know that this document isn't perfect, and you can't really say that modern America bears any resemblance at all to the world or the document when it was originally written, because it was a completely different time, it was completely different people. America as an institution is totally different. Every single human being is different than the original America when it was first founded. I like to think about the world in an ideal sense, and so I sort of tend to think that we're steadily marching towards some perfect time where we all have flying electric cars, marriage between any two people for love and for tax and for human rights reasons is legal. But we're not moving towards that ideal. We're bouncing back and forth, or around, I guess, not necessarily between two extremes. We're bouncing around. There was a time when those things were true, when humans had those things. It's not like, I've read before, and I'm not sure how true this is, but I've read that there are millions, 2.5 million or something slaves still on Earth right now. So it's not like when we fix something or when we right a wrong, that thing is gone forever. It's going to come back. People are going to forget about it, and we're going to make the same mistakes over and over and over again. And all we can try to do is learn from them and not make them again. Our world map, for instance, when I was born, while I was being raised, I was thinking that we're moving towards some final world map where eventually we'll have a globe that can be printed or built or whatever, and it's the final globe. There's no need to make any changes. But that's never going to happen. We're always going to be changing. We're always going to be modifying the way the world works. And whether it's for the better or for the worse is not for us to decide. We can try to make things better. There's always going to be someone that comes along that thinks that their way is better, whereas we would think that was worse. For instance, in the recent past, like as early as the last century, I guess not last century, but the 1900s, no such thing. Like romantic marriage was unheard of. That wasn't a thing. Marriages were arranged, and you married someone because of either some kind of financial arrangement, parents thought you were good for each other. Funerals were not a thing that happened in funeral homes. They didn't happen separate from you. They happened in a home, and they were not mourning occasions. They were actually happy occasions. There was a time in sort of Victorian England where human waste was literally, like they knew it was connected to disease. Human waste was literally very valuable as fertilizer, whereas now we basically just try to get it as far away from us as possible so it doesn't get us sick, but it's not considered good, it's considered waste. And all of those things that I just mentioned are actually not in Western culture, but in other cultures are still true now. They're still true today. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with either of those points of view. All of those things are going to come around again, even in Western culture. All of our Western traditions, we say it's the way things are, but who are we to decide the way things are? The way things are the way they are. They're not always that way, and there's no way to know that they will be that way forever. They are that way as long as we do them that way. So yeah, everything that was once old will be new again. So me today, I'm an unemployed master's graduate. I have a degree in chemistry, and I'm trying very, very hard to figure out the world. I am finding that I was brought up with a pretty easy life. My childhood wasn't difficult in any way, really. I've got some intelligence. It's just about enough to know and realize how naive and stupid I am. I don't really know what to believe about a higher power. I do believe in science and reason and logic, and I put a lot of stock in those things and using my brain to sort of think things out rationally. I obviously want the best for myself in life and, of course, all the people I care about, and I want to be happy. Tomorrow, I don't really know. You can ask me then, but at some point, I'm not going to be the person I am today anymore. Before I go, I'm going off of what I had written. I wanted to talk about sort of what since I wrote that, a lot of that was written. I wanted to talk directly on what I've thought about since I wrote that. Thinking about sort of rebirth and all of this stuff, when I moved from Calgary to Ottawa for university, I got a chance to one day start completely from scratch. I mean, when I came here, I was completely alone. Our dad was on a later flight later in the day. So for a while when I was here, there was a couple of hours where I literally, nobody could tell me who I was. I came to a place and that was me. I got to basically start completely fresh. And that was really, really freeing. And I'm sort of feeling right now, this summer, just in the 2 weeks that I haven't been working, I almost want, like, I love the people that are in my life right now. And I wouldn't want to change the people. But I don't want to be pigeonholed as the scientist that I was in university. I love science and I'm never going to stop learning about science. But who I am is so much more than that now. I've been making these videos a lot. I've been working with a different music, a lot of different video. I've got a ton of projects going on. I'm trying to get a job in government right now. But really, what I want to do is keep going until I find my passion. So far, things like this are my passion. I found that in the last few months, I've thought and spoken and written a lot about gender issues, and there are a lot of causes that are really sort of important to me that I hold very dearly, and that is who I am. I'm sort of wishing there's a lot of stuff, like this room, you can't tell, but it's pretty messy. I've neatened up like this square, but most of it's pretty kind of all over the place, and I have a lot of stuff that I could probably very easily get rid of and I wouldn't even notice. When I came to Ottawa, I literally, the only stuff I had was stuff that I could carry in my arms. And for a long time, that was what I had. I lived in residence, so they had a bed and a night table and all that stuff. For a long time, what I owned was like, I could carry everything I owned. And I built up a lot of stuff over the last, I guess, 7 or 8 years since I've been here. It would be interesting to me to get that chance to basically start over. And I've been looking into the possibility of selling or getting rid of some of my stuff. But I really do need to do that. I need to start over. There's a lot of stuff in my life right now that's just broken. So yeah, I don't want to, like, that, not in a bad way. Like, again, the people that I have in my life are really incredible, and the things that I'm doing in general are very good. But I feel like it'd be really cool to be able to restart some of the stuff that's in my life. Just start completely fresh. Yeah, so I think that's all I want to talk about. I've been recording. This video is going for like 29 minutes now. So hopefully I'll be able to edit it down below 20 minutes. I hope you like listening to this. Look through the sources that I put in the description or that I'm going to put in the description. All this stuff is super important and interesting to me. And I'm going to keep thinking about it. I love you, and I'll see you next week. Bye.